Angela's Ashes. In 1997 or thereabouts, I got married to my beautiful bride, Sherry Steyerhole. And on our honeymoon, I read to her aloud from the book called Angela's Ashes. Now, Angela's Ashes was a story about a family that grew up in Limerick in terrible times, very, very dire situations. And it was a big bestseller. The world knew about it. Long story short, back in those days, Peggy and Gary would come visit. And whenever I went to go back to the airport, it was always a very awkward time sitting at the airport waiting for them to leave. One of those times, I said to Peggy, my mother, your grandmother, our great-grandmother, our great-great-grandmother, tell me an Angela's Ashes story. Now, I knew that my mother had grown up in a time when things were very, very different. Poverty was a huge problem in Ireland. Families living in small circumstances, bad circumstances. But cutting to the chase, my mother lived in a poor part of Cork. It was a multi-story old Georgian house, 4 floors. And as far as I understand it, there was 2 families per floor, each side of the story. But there came a time when my grandmother, Lily Murphy, God bless her, decided it was time to get a stove. Now, when I talk about getting a stove, they didn't have stoves as we talk about it back then. They lived with an open grate fire and a little cook pot. But Cork Gas Company at that point was offering stoves, as they say, on the never never, on the hire purchase. And my grandmother, Lily Murphy, decided to get a stove to go and help with the cooking, as one would expect. So Lily got a stove, came one day, men came out, plumbed the gas up, got the whole thing. But because they'd never had a stove, they never really kind of knew how to cook. Specifically, they didn't know how to bake. And the decision was made to go and get a neighbour down the street to come along and help them bake an apple pie. But the problem was, to bake an apple pie, you needed apples, you needed flour, you needed all these things. They didn't have the money for it. Now, because it was the start of the summer, what the decision was that they would pawn the blankets off the bed, the heavy winter blankets. So my mother, Peggy, was tasked with taking the blankets off the bed to the pawn shop, where she got £1. Now, she actually got a £1 note, which was a £1 note for the money lender. And back then, pounds, there was 20 shillings in a pound. It was what's called the old money. And so she took the note to the money lender, and he gave her 17 shillings and 6 pence. So you can see automatically there was some usury going on and people were losing money. She now had 17 and 6. And from there, she went to the local market and she got bruised apples. She went and got flour, etc. She also went to a place where they had this called broken biscuits. And that was sort of the leftovers from some of the bakeries back then. They'd have crushed biscuits and stuff like that. And she brought that back. Ended up having a big party. And along the short, they got the neighbour over and they started to bake the apple pie. So now the whole house is involved in this apple pie business. They're going to make 2 apple pies. So you have lots of ragamuffin children lying around, hanging out, waiting for the pies. And meanwhile, Lily Murphy and her neighbour making the pies, decisions were made to go and send out for a few drops, as the helpful neighbour decided she needed a little more help making the apple pies. Long story be short, they made the apple pies, and Lily Murphy to this day apparently called out it was the worst apple pie she ever had in her life. And of course, it was a very expensive apple pie because they now had no blankets. And to get the blankets out of the pawn, they had to save up. Now, the interesting thing that I recall from my mother was that all 4 stories, every family involved, donated a few pennies or a shilling every week. So by the time November rolled around or October rolled around, they had enough money saved to get the blankets out of the pawn. That's an interesting story when you think about it. That a group of families came together to put blankets into the pawn shop, to make 2 apple pies, and then came together to pay to save the blankets from the pawn shop. That's a different time and a different place. And that probably would have been in the, oh my gosh, in the early 50s in Cork City, Ireland. That's a story for you.